Hi, I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. Alexander Hamilton, the fiery founding father who came to America as an immigrant and an orphan and wound up being one of the most powerful people in the nation, has received a lot of attention lately, owing to the 2015 musical based on the biography by Ron Chernow. And that is well-deserved. Alexander Hamilton was brilliant and a complex and interesting personality who played a vital role in the founding of the nation. But he is almost as well known for the circumstances of his death. Shot to death in a duel with Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States, as anything he did in life. And as intriguing as the Hamilton-Burr duel was, it is even more interesting if you look at it in context of Alexander Hamilton's history with the practice of dueling. Over his lifetime, Alexander Hamilton was a party to no less than 10 affairs of honor, 7 as a primary and 3 others as someone else's second. And it's even more interesting when you look at the duels that were engaged by members of his family and the odd string of coincidences that tie together the bizarre history of Alexander Hamilton's duels. The story begins with the infamous Hamilton-Reynolds Affair. In November of 1792, a man named James Reynolds was accused of financial crimes that involved public funds. When he was arrested, he tried to negotiate a deal by making an astounding claim. The Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, he said, was involved in the scheme. This information was passed to 3 U.S. senators who went to confront Hamilton about the charges, one of those being the Virginia Senator James Monroe, a future president of the United States. But when they talked to Hamilton, the story took even another twist. Hamilton claimed that his financial dealings with Reynolds had nothing to do with the financial scheme, but instead were blackmail payments that Hamilton was making because he had had an illicit affair with Reynolds' wife. And Hamilton had letters to prove his story. As the affair would have been a scandal but would not have been illegal, the senators agreed to drop the matter and all agreed that they would keep the details secret. And the entire thing seemed to blow over. That is, until 5 years later. In 1792, a man named James Thompson Callender, a scandal-mongering journalist and pamphleteer, published a pamphlet that included details on Hamilton's affair with Mrs. Reynolds, and included some of the letters that had been part of the 1792 investigation. Embarrassed, Hamilton was forced to release publicly details of the affair in order to free himself from charges that he participated in the financial scandal. Hamilton was incensed, and he was convinced that the person who had released the letters was James Monroe. Monroe denied the charge, and the two came very close to calling each other liars, a claim that could very easily lead to one or the other demanding satisfaction in a gentleman's duel. The situation got so bad that in one face-to-face meeting, Alexander Hamilton brought his brother-in-law, English businessman James Barker Church, with him, just in case it turned into a duel then and there, and he had to have a second with him. But the reason the two ended up not fighting a duel had to do with a third party. James Monroe had invited a mutual acquaintance who they had both met while fighting the Revolution to be the intermediary as they argued back and forth. And that intermediary thought that they were both being childish and knew that a duel could end their careers. And he was the one that was able to tamp down the rhetoric and prevent the two from escalating to the point where they had to meet on the field of honor, something that could have cost either of them their lives and almost certainly would have cost both of them their political careers. And that person who prevented Alexander Hamilton from having a career-ending duel with James Monroe was Aaron Burr. Burr and Hamilton had a history. At one time they had been friends, but that really changed in 1791. At the time, the U.S. Senate seat from New York was selected not by a vote of the people, but by a vote of the New York legislature. And Aaron Burr had managed to scheme through the legislature to unseat the incumbent Revolutionary War General Philip Schuyler. Philip Schuyler was the father of Elizabeth Schuyler, who was married to Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton was convinced that Burr was a rogue from the moment that he out-schemed his father-in-law for that Senate seat. But Alexander Hamilton was not the first of Philip Schuyler's sons-in-laws to fight a duel with Aaron Burr. John Barker Church, the English businessman whom Hamilton had brought with him in the meeting with Monroe in case they had to fight a duel then and there, was married to another of Schuyler's daughters, and he hated Burr just as much as Hamilton did. And in 1799, he accused Burr of taking bribes. That led to a challenge, which led to a duel at the dueling grounds in Weehawken, New Jersey. Burr fired first, he missed. Church fired second, and he missed, but he came very close. His bullet tore Burr's cloak just a little bit over, and it would have prevented the duel that killed Alexander Hamilton. Their honors satisfied, they did not fire a second shot. A poignant part of Act 2 of the musical Hamilton is the death of Hamilton's son Philip, who was killed, of course, in a duel. That duel, which was fought in 1801, was fought between Hamilton's son Philip and a New York City lawyer who had made disparaging comments about Alexander Hamilton, and Philip was shot to death in the duel, which was fought at the dueling grounds in Weehawken, New Jersey, the same place where Philip's uncle had fought the duel with Aaron Burr, and was fought with dueling pistols that Philip Hamilton had borrowed from his uncle, John Barker Church, the same pistols that Church had used in his duel with Aaron Burr. In 1804, Aaron Burr, who was then Vice President of the United States, decided to run for governor of New York, and he lost that election largely because of opposition by Alexander Hamilton. When some disparaging comments about Burr made by Hamilton were published in the paper, it led to a challenge and a duel. That famous duel was fought at the dueling grounds in Weehawken, New Jersey, the same grounds where Hamilton's brother-in-law had dueled the same man, Aaron Burr, and where Hamilton's son, Philip Hamilton, had been killed. And the pistols used in the duel were the set that belonged to John Barker Church, the same set of pistols that had killed Hamilton's son in 1801 and nearly killed Aaron Burr in 1799. Hamilton shot high, Burr struck Hamilton in the chest, a fatal and famous blow. Dueling was not uncommon amongst the gentleman class of early America, but fatalities were. Hamilton's participation in so many challenges, even though he only fought the one duel, shows how excessive his sense of honor was, but of course the same could be said of Aaron Burr. It is, however, a supreme irony that Aaron Burr, who had kept Alexander Hamilton from fighting an ill-advised duel with James Monroe, later became the hand of Hamilton's death. The duel effectively ended Burr's political career. Eventually, he was accused of treason in a supposed conspiracy with Spain, and although he was acquitted, he never again served in public office. To this day, he has a reputation, some say unfairly, of being a traitor to the nation. There's still disagreement over exactly what happened in the duel between Hamilton and Burr because no one who was present could say definitively who had fired first. Some claim that Hamilton had missed on purpose, and in fact he left a note behind saying that he planned to do that, although that note might have been a ruse. But others claim that Burr fired first and it was Burr's shot that caused Hamilton to miss. And that entire question took a bizarre turn in 1976. You see, this infamous set of pistols that was owned by John Barker Church and that was used in all three of those duels involving Hamilton and Burr were purchased in London in 1797, and they stayed in the Church family until 1930 when they were sold to Chase Manhattan Bank, which was, ironically, a descendant of the Manhattan Company, which had been founded by Aaron Burr. And Chase Manhattan Bank still owns the pistols and sometimes puts them on display. But in 1976, Chase Manhattan Bank allowed the Smithsonian Institution to inspect the pistols, and there they found a shocking twist. The pistols had been designed to cheat. One of the pistols had a special mechanism built in so that if you pushed the trigger far forward, it would create a pistol with a hair trigger, which might allow you to fire a hair faster than someone you were fighting in a duel, something that would have been incredibly dishonorable. And as those pistols belonged to Hamilton's family, it's likely that Hamilton knew about that modification and Burr did not. And so some claim that the reason that Alexander Hamilton fired high in his duel with Aaron Burr was because he had chosen to cheat using a pistol with a hair trigger, and that caused him to fire early as he was lowering his pistol. And of course, that's an unanswerable question, and maybe that is fitting with the most enigmatic of America's Founding Fathers. It is certainly another twist in the bizarre history of Alexander Hamilton's Duels. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, then please go ahead and click that thumbs up button, which is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to make a suggestion for another topic for the History Guy, please feel free to write those in the comment section, and I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 more minutes of forgotten history, all you need to do is click the subscribe button, which is there on your right.